When I was 8, my family moved into an old colonial that was built in 1810. My father still lives there. Until I was 17, every night before I fell asleep, I would feel pressure next to me, as if someone sat down on the bed next to me. This would always be accompanied with a feeling of increased pressure in the air. Although I knew this probably didn't happen to everyone, I didn't think much about it. That is until I got a cat. He was a present for my 12th birthday. Each night, he would sack out on that bed near my feet. Each night, he would bolt from a dead sleep and glare at something in the doorway before hightailing it out of there. A few moments later, the pressure would return. Again, while this was a weird thing to happen, I didn't really question it. Maybe the cat was just neurotic. I didn't talk about this nightly occurrence to anyone. However, I did refer to this feeling or presence as Charlotte, and I don't know why. One summer day when I was 13, an elderly man and his middle-aged daughter pulled up to our house and explained that the father lived in the house with his aunt when he was a boy, and that he himself had raised his family there for a few years. They had been visiting family in the neighborhood, and they wondered if they could take a tour for old time's sake. My mother agreed. She, my sister, and I led them around the house. They recalled different memories here and there. Afterward, my mother asked them if they remembered strange occurrences or stories about the house. Like ghosts? The old man asked and chuckled. His daughter became very quiet and said firmly, "It's not funny, Dad." The man explained that everyone who slept in one bedroom felt a little unsettled, and his daughter interrupted to say that she always felt it if someone sat on the edge of the bed as she tried to go to sleep. Her father said they used to joke that it was just his aunt looking out for them. His aunt, Charlotte. This confirmed what I had never admitted to myself, that I had a ghost that basically tucked me in at night for the previous 5 years. Still, going to bed was never freaky or scary. I just tried to ignore the feeling when it came. Until one night when I was 16. My parents had been going through a weird patch in their marriage. I was feeling depressed, and in general, it was a weird year. I went to bed, and after about 20 minutes, the cat took his typical bolting exit from the bed, and I felt the familiar pressure on my side. Then I felt a hand brush through my hair. I ran straight downstairs to the living room where my mother was dozing. She woke up when I burst in the room, saw my face, and asked what was wrong. I told her I had had a nightmare and left it at that. I spent a week sleeping in the guest room. When I got the nerve to go back to my room, I was nearly asleep when I realized I didn't feel the pressure next to me. I did feel pressure in the air. I rolled on my back and saw the figure of a woman in her 60s, wearing a house dress, her hair pulled back in a bun, with her arms folded. She was looking right at me, very concerned. When I found my voice, she disappeared. I said out loud, "I don't care if you stay, but I can never, ever, ever see you again." I never did. However, a few years later, after my parents divorced and my dad moved in his girlfriend and her 4-year-old son, I wasn't really surprised when she told me her little boy said a lady named Charlotte told him stories at night.
Grandma. My great-grandmother was very close to my mom and was apparently an incredible woman. She died before I was born, but my mom tells us a lot of stories about her. From the time my little sister was born, she had a very strong resemblance to old pictures of my great-grandma and her whole side of the family. Once, when my sister was a baby just beginning to learn to speak, my mom was holding my sister on her lap, talking and playing with her. My sister reached up and took my mother's face in her hands, like my great-grandmother used to do to my mom when she was alive, looked her in the eye, and very clearly said, "You always were such a beautiful baby." My mother was shocked, but my sister, who was not yet speaking in full sentences, had gone back to making her typical baby sounds. My mom told this story at dinner when my sister was about 6 or 7. This was the first time my sister ever heard the story, and she was a little freaked out. As soon as my mom finished telling the story, though, my sister's eyes twitched, as if she were winking.
Mommy told me never to go in the basement, but I wanted to see what was making that noise. It kinda sounded like a puppy, and I wanted to see the puppy. So I opened the basement door and tiptoed down a bit. I didn't see a puppy. And then Mommy yanked me out of the basement, and she yelled at me. Mommy had never yelled at me before, and it made me sad, and I cried. Then Mommy told me never to go into the basement again, and she gave me a cookie. That made me feel better. So I didn't ask her why the boy in the basement was making noises like a puppy, or why he had no hands or feet. A man leaves his house every morning to walk to work and passes a mental hospital surrounded by a wooden fence. Every morning the patients are out in the yard and he can hear them saying in unison, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. One day, he gets curious and looks through a hole in the fence. Suddenly, a stick shoots out and pokes him right in the eye. fuck?" he says. While walking away, pissed off, he can hear the patients saying, 11, 11, 11, 11.
About 10 years ago, my 3-year-old son and I moved into a new house. Well, it was new to us, but it was actually a very old house. The inside of the house always seemed to be just a little darker and a little colder than it should be. I had noticed that the first time I went to view the house, but as it was summer, I figured it would save on cooling costs. Soon after we moved in, a friend of mine came by. We were sitting and talking for a few minutes, but she seemed uncomfortable the whole time. Then I saw in her face that something in the other room caught her attention. Her eyes got big. She said she had to go. I asked her what was wrong, but she said she didn't want to tell me. I kept after her because her reaction was kind of freaking me out. On her way out the door, she finally said, "This house is haunted." But she wouldn't tell me what made her think so. Still to this day, 10 years later, she refuses to tell me what she saw. About a week after that night, my 3-year-old son casually asked me who the old lady in the bathroom was. One day, I was leaving for work, but once I got to the car, I realized I needed to run back in the house and get something. I walked into the house, and as soon as I got inside, a framed photo on the wall shot off. Now, I don't mean it fell because of some issue with a nail or anything like that. It shot horizontally away from the wall, not vertically down. It landed on a mosaic table with enough force to break some of the tiles off of it. I felt like whatever was in the house was pissed that I came back in after it thought I had left for the day. After living in the house for about 6 months, I noticed a weird square cut into the boards on the deck. There was no handle, but I was able to pry it up. The hole was just big enough to fit through, and there was a ladder going down. For some reason, I went down and found myself in what looked like a homemade basement. It was basically just a room dug out of the earth. No constructed walls or stone supports or anything like you would expect if it was a basement that was built with the house. It was very dark, but I could see over in the corner a suspicious-looking large stone. It looked like one of those light-colored 100-plus-year-old headstones that you see in old cemeteries. I felt the need to get out of that basement as fast as I could and never went back. The part that affected me the most and the reason we left the house is because one night I was in bed, but not yet asleep, lying on my stomach. I heard someone walk into the room. I heard footsteps come from the doorway over to my bed. I didn't realize until later that the fact that I heard the footsteps was weird because the room was carpeted. When the footsteps reached my bed, I felt someone put their hands on my back. 2 hands just gently laid flat on my back and kept there. I assumed it was my son. I asked him what he was doing, but got no answer. I looked up and no one was there. I got up and checked my son's bedroom, but he was in bed asleep. We moved out soon after that.
When I was a child, my family moved to a big, old 2-story house with big empty rooms and creaking floorboards. Both my parents worked, so I was often home alone. When I came back from school one early evening, the house was still dark. I called out, "Mom?" and I heard her humming, and she replied pleasantly, "Yes?" from upstairs. I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in, and again got the same "Yes?" reply. We were decorating at the time, and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms, but she was in one of the far ones, right down the hall. I felt uneasy, but I figured that was only natural, so I rushed forward to see my mom, knowing that her presence would calm my fears, as a mother's presence always does. Just as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself into the room, I heard the front door downstairs open, and my mother call, "Sweetie, are you home?" in that same pleasant voice. I jumped back, startled, and ran down the stairs to her. But as I glanced back from the top of the stairs, the door to the room slowly opened a crack. For a brief moment, I saw something strange in there. I don't know what it was, but it was staring at me.